Well, sit, children. Let me give you the subject of the day.
Welcome back to Twisted Skinz Tech. If you're in the market for an entry-level 1440p graphics card that won't break the bank, some of you guys may remember that I recently reviewed the Sapphire VaporX R9 290, which was very capable of playing most titles at high settings at around 60 frames per second. Granted, the games tested weren't the latest AAA titles, but they definitely were pretty demanding. Unfortunately, the mining craze has definitely pushed up second-hand prices from my original review, so let's look at an alternative to see if it can take the Radeon's 1440p crown. So today we're going to take a look at this Asus GTX 970, kindly lent to me by my good friend Dean, to see if this card can match or beat the R9 290 at 1440p. This card comes with a base clock of 1114 MHz, a boost clock of 1253 MHz, 1664 CUDA cores, a 256-bit memory bus, and 4GB of GDDR5. The GTX 970 runs at an effective speed of 7 GHz, where the R9 290 runs at 5.6 GHz. So, looking at the raw specs, the 970 is certainly the faster of the two, but the Radeon has the advantage of being more powerful with that massive 512-bit memory bus and a true 4GB of VRAM. However, let's see how this pans out in real-world scenarios. So we're testing this card on the usual Skylake system to see how it fares against the R9 290 at 1440p. First up we have Crysis 3, and as usual we're running the high preset, high system spec, anisotropic filtering x16 and SMAA x2 on Welcome to the Jungle. In this environment, the GTX 970 was run at stock clocks, but actually boosted to 1342 MHz, a whole 300 MHz faster than the Radeon. The Nvidia card turned in a very smooth and consistent performance, averaging 70 FPS, with 1% lows of 49.5 and 0.1% lows of 26.5 frames per second. It was ultimately overtaken at the last hurdle though, as the stock R9 290 delivered an average of 75 FPS, 1% lows of 50 and 0.1% lows of 36 frames per second. During actual gameplay though, I doubt most people would notice any variance. Up next we have Skyrim Special Edition, which was run at the Ultra preset, as both cards were able to provide a great gaming experience on these settings. I had high hopes for the GTX 970, as the Nvidia cards I've tested so far have provided a better experience on this title. So I wasn't particularly surprised that the 970 gave a better average of 58 compared to the Radeon's 55 frames per second. However, during intense combat, Team Green was not able to keep up with the Radeon, which rather ironically kept a cool head considering how hot it got. The Nvidia card managed 1% lows of 45 and 0.1% lows of 37 frames per second. Under these conditions, the Radeon's tighter timing gave the smoother experience with 1% lows of 46, which only dropped to 44 frames per second on the all-important 0.1% lows. Moving on to Rise of the Tomb Raider, I was actually unable to benchmark this title on DX12, which may have put the Radeon at a disadvantage, but the show must go on. PresentMon decided to crash and not record any results. I tried numerous times to resolve this issue, but ultimately it wasn't having it. So the trusty old Fraps benchmark was used once again. This title was run at the high preset with FXAA anti-aliasing, and for the first time the Nvidia card did just enough to secure this round, beating Team Red by a small but noticeable margin. Averaging 59 FPS compared to the Radeon's 58, 1% lows of 47 compared to the Radeon's 43, and the gap widens at the 0.1% lows, where the Nvidia card returned to 43 compared to Team Red's 38 frames per second. I believe this is what constituted to the game feeling more fluid on the GTX 970. Up next we have Dark Souls 3, which doesn't have that many options for graphics compared to most games, but was run on the high rather than maximum preset. I felt this gave a slightly smoother experience on either card, as the difference in graphical fidelity wasn't particularly noticeable. On this title, both cards gave very immersive gameplay and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between either, which was reflected in the results. So after 3 runs in the same area, the GTX 970 turned in an average of 57 FPS compared to the Radeon's 57.3. The 1% lows came in at 47 and 48 respectively, and the 0.1% lows were 34 and 34.6 frames per second. Well within the margin of error. We'd call this one a tie. Moving on to The Witcher 3, this was run at the high preset with high post-processing and hairworks disabled. If you have yet to see The Witcher 3 at 1440p, it looks fantastic with all the vibrant colours and lighting effects, especially if you own an IPS monitor. Being that this is an Nvidia sponsored title, I had high expectations from the GTX 970 and it definitely delivered. The performance was more consistent on Team Green with a lagless smooth experience compared to the Radeon's occasional stutters. This was confirmed when looking at the frame timing, where the GTX 970 averaged 52 FPS over 3 plays, matching the R9 290. 99% of the time both cards stayed above 42 FPS, and finally the 0.1% lows only dropped to 34.6, which was considerably higher than Team Red's 25 frames per second, a smoother experience on the GTX 970. And finally we have Shadow of Mordor, which was run at the very high preset instead of Ultra. Again, it's pretty hard to distinguish between the two, but I felt this gave the better overall experience. Once again, this is an Nvidia sponsored title, so expect performance to favour the GTX 970. This was echoed by the results, where the 970 returned an average of 68 compared to the Radeon 71, but 99% of the time the GTX 970 stayed above 54 FPS compared to Team Red's 38. A noticeable difference. When we dropped to the 0.1% lows, both cards were able to stay above 30 FPS, with the Nvidia card just edging ahead with 34 versus 32 frames per second. So there you have it guys, if Radeon cards are overinflated where you live, then the GTX 970 is a serious contender for 1440p, and as the results show, they traded blows depending on the title, with the GTX 970 clearly favouring Nvidia sponsored titles. As you guys probably noticed, I changed the format of my usual review, so be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments section if you prefer the inclusion of graphs, or if you prefer a side-by-side comparison. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and let's see if we can hit 30 likes. I will be doing a comparison soon with some newer titles including Prey, Doom, Battlefield 1 and Mass Effect Andromeda, so consider subscribing and turning your notifications on to make sure you don't miss it. Thanks for watching and stay passionate about PC, whatever your budget, and I'll catch you guys in the next episode.